Welcome back to OC Street Files. Tonight we're heading to Ohio. Dayton, to be exact. A city most people don't think of when they hear the word Taliban. But for years on the streets of Dayton, that name struck fear like few others. This wasn't some foreign army. This was the Dayton Taliban, a ruthless street gang that rose up in the late 1990s and early 2000s, running drugs, guns, and violence across neighborhoods already drowning in poverty. The Dayton Taliban was born out of the crack era, when money was fast and survival was faster. They weren't the biggest crew in America, but they were loud, fearless, and reckless enough to make the news and land on federal radar. One of the names tied heavy to the Dayton Taliban was Terrence T-Bone Brown. Alongside a crew of young hustlers, Brown and his lieutenants built their reputation off intimidation. Drive-bys, home invasions, and brutal enforcement made sure nobody crossed them. They controlled corners with iron fists and heavy artillery. The Taliban's operation was simple but deadly effective. They moved cocaine and heroin in bulk, broke it down, and flooded the streets. They had young lookouts posted on blocks, armed hitters riding in stolen whips, and plenty of people willing to pull the trigger for respect. The name Taliban wasn't chosen by accident. They wanted to be seen as militant, unrelenting, untouchable. But like most crews chasing fast money, violence followed. Shootouts with rival gangs became regular. Innocent bystanders got caught in the crossfire. Dayton police and federal agents couldn't ignore the chaos. In 2005, the feds moved in. Indictments rained down under RICO. Members of the Dayton Taliban were charged with everything from drug trafficking to murder for hire. Witnesses testified about brutal beatings, robberies, and executions meant to keep people in line. One case that stuck out was the murder of a young woman who knew too much. She had been close to members of the gang, but once they thought she might flip, she was silenced forever. That message, snitches get stitched or worse, was the Taliban's way of keeping their empire intact. The crackdown didn't just bring down leaders, it ripped through the rank and file, from top hitters to young corner boys. Terrence Brown was hit with a life sentence. Other members got decades behind bars. And just like that, the Dayton Taliban as an organized force crumbled. But the legacy, it left scars across Dayton. Families lost sons, daughters, fathers. Communities already struggling were left with trauma, distrust of the system, and memories of nights when gunfire echoed like fireworks. The Dayton Taliban showed the world that even in a mid-sized city like Dayton, Ohio, the streets can be just as ruthless as New York, LA, or Chicago. They proved that you don't need millions of dollars or a national name to leave behind fear, destruction, and tragedy. This was the Dayton Taliban, a crew that rose fast, lived violent, and fell hard. This is OC Street Files. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit subscribe, and share this episode if you want more raw, unfiltered stories. Because no matter where you are, the streets always have a story.
Our next story takes us to Tulsa, Oklahoma, a city with a deep history, from the Black Wall Street Massacre to modern-day gang wars. And in the middle of it all stands one of the most feared alliances in the state, the Tulsa Crip Alliance. Now, this wasn't just one gang, this was a coalition. Sets like the Neighborhood Crips, the Rolling 60s, Hoover Sets, and others linking up under one umbrella. They formed what became known as the TCA, the Tulsa Crip Alliance. Together, they turned the streets of Tulsa into a battlefield. The rise of the Tulsa Crip Alliance dates back to the late 1980s and early 1990s. LA Crip culture had already spread east, carried through music, prison systems, and hustlers who relocated. By the time it hit Tulsa, the blueprint was already written. Blue flags, strict sets, and a reputation built on violence and control of the drug trade. TCA made its mark heavy in North Tulsa. That's where corners became hot zones, where neighborhoods were divided by color, and where gunshots echoed like background noise. They were ruthless in their enforcement. Disrespect a member, short a bag, or try to hustle on their turf. The consequences came fast and bloody. One of the cases that put TCA on the national radar was the Good Friday shootings in 2012. Though not every shooter was directly tied to TCA, police investigations revealed the deep connections between Tulsa's Crip sets, gang retaliation, and street politics. The violence that day left multiple people dead and shook the entire city. The feds and local police knew they had to move in. Major indictments followed in the mid-2000s, bringing down over 100 alleged Crip members and associates tied to the TCA drug distribution, murder conspiracies, racketeering. The list of charges was long, but even with arrests, the influence of TCA didn't disappear. The structure of the alliance made it harder to dismantle. When one set got hit, another carried the weight. When leaders were locked up, younger soldiers stepped up. Like a hydra, cut off one head, another appeared. The Tulsa Crip Alliance was more than a gang, it was a network. It controlled neighborhoods, influenced prison politics, and tied into larger interstate drug pipelines. Reports even tied some members to trafficking routes stretching into Texas and Kansas, linking them with bigger supply lines. But as with every gang empire, the streets took their toll. Endless cycles of retaliation meant bodies dropped on both sides. Families were destroyed. Kids grew up seeing funerals more often than graduations. And while the alliance made money and power for some, for the community, it meant fear, silence, and trauma that still echoes today. Tulsa has tried to heal. Community leaders, churches, and outreach programs continue to fight back. But the legacy of the Tulsa Crip Alliance is carved into the city's history, a reminder of how quickly the streets can turn into war zones when alliances form and violence rules. This is OC Street Files, the Tulsa Crip Alliance, a crew that showed the world that even in mid-America, the streets run just as cold as anywhere else. Drop your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more, and share this if you know somebody who needs to understand the real story behind the headlines. Because in the game of alliances, there are no permanent friends, only permanent enemies. Chicago has birthed some of the most notorious street organizations in America, and one of the most feared is the Maniac Latin Disciples, or MLDs. The story starts in the late 1960s. Fernando King Fernie Zayas, a Puerto Rican teenager in Humboldt Park, founded the Latin Disciples. What began as a group for protection in a tough neighborhood evolved into something much bigger. By the 1980s, after alliances and wars, they became the Maniac Latin Disciples, one of the largest Latino gangs in Chicago. At their peak, the MLDs were part of the Folk Nation Alliance, standing alongside the Gangster Disciples and others. Their symbols, a heart with devil horns, a pitchfork, and the number 3, became feared signs on Chicago's walls. Money flowed in through the drug trade. The MLDS controlled corners, housing projects, and entire blocks. They made millions. But here's the flip side. Like many crews, the money came fast and left faster. No financial planning, no legit investments. Imagine if the same discipline used to run corners had been used to own property or build businesses. That's generational wealth instead of federal indictments. The 1990s brought bloody wars. The MLDs clashed with the Latin Kings, insane Spanish Cobras, and even former allies. Follow OC Street Files for more deep dives into the gangs, cartels, and underworld crews shaping history. For more full episodes, subscribe to the YouTube, link in bio.